Hi everyone. I don't know about you, but over the last few weeks in particular, I've just been getting downloads of so much information I can hardly keep up with it. You know, sometimes it's just if I'm lying in that sort of half sleep state when I've first waken up in the morning, or if I'm running or walking in particular, I'm just finding so much information about the concepts of reality just coming down to me, and I'm probably going to try and do a few more videos over the next few days just to try to consolidate all this information that's coming in so it makes sense. So today I want to talk about the reversibility of time. If you want a little bit more information about time and how it fits into our 3D or 4D dimension that we're currently experiencing, I'm going to put a link up to a video, but it's just important to know as a starting point that time is something that has been created as to allow us to have the experience that we're currently experiencing. And I do believe that in this evolution or ascension of humanity, that we're actually being asked to look at time differently, because fifth dimensionality, multidimensionality, looks at time completely differently. And I do think that one of the things we're being asked to do is actually reverse time. So I wanted to talk a bit about that today. So firstly, I'm going to start with the creation of time and how I kind of see it as it was created. So I'm going to start with just this point in the middle here, which, you know, we can call source. That's basically 0 point. That's everything. All things. There's no separation. There's no fracturing of consciousness at this point. It's everything. And then as everything fractured out into space, we had to have this concept of time so that we could experience points of space in a linear way, if that makes sense. So there's this creation of something called time. And in time, it is really a process of leaving source. So we see this process of leaving source, going out like a giant out breath, as being one of the parts of time. But like all things that exist in the current version of reality, is that everything gets created as duality. It must have its opposite to balance it, just like yin and yang. So at the same time, we have the creation of a timeline that goes back to source. So at any point, and this is really important to get, that any point that we are currently perceiving or observing, is there's like two energies crossing that point. There's an energy leaving source and there's an energy going back to source. So I think that that's the first thing, is time, like all things, is a duality. But of course, this looks very linear. In our multidimensional universe, you know, this out-breath and in-breath is obviously, you know, much larger. It's a torus field. It's a multidimensional torus field of time, of source breathing out and then breathing back in, but understanding that both of those things exist at the same time. Hence why there are two fields in a torus field, and that's the nature of duality for all things that we see in this reality. Okay, so if we look at where we currently are now, it's like we've played out the out-breath. You know, it's like we've hit point X, which is what we might perceive as being as far from source as we can get. And, you know, all the prophecies have kind of said we're going to get as far from source, totally forget who we are, think we're in this reality that's real and it's not, and that then the next step is to then come back to source. So it's almost like we're at this point here right now where we need to reverse things to go back. Another way to think about this is just in terms of, this is a rubber band. It's like a rubber band that's reached the end of its stretch and now it's about to bounce back. So like anything, I kind of get the impression that the stretch out takes a long time, but that the stretch back in, you know, can be very quick. Now, this is where looking at time as past and future is actually perhaps not really the right way to look at it, because if we're looking at future here, at the moment, we're seeing future as going away from source, and all our creations are based in the future, whereas our new future is going back to source. So these are actually going in different directions, but they're both the future, if that makes sense. So what we need to do now is find a way to say, well, it's not so much future and past, but perhaps it's about forwards and backwards. So we were going forwards as part of the out breath. And as soon as we hit the end of the out breath, which is where the lungs are fully empty and everything's played out, is that forwards then becomes going back. So in other words, at the moment, if we're still trying to breathe out, we're actually going backwards. So we have to think about now, how do we switch that round to forwards? And another thing I find really interesting about looking at time this way is that reality is already pre-created. In that out breath, the in breath already exists. So everything already exists. So when we say we're creators, it's not so much that we're creators. All we're doing is really deciding where in this giant fractal of multidimensionality we put our focus. So in a way, we're not so much creators as choosers. So as a follow-on effect from acknowledging that perhaps it's more about choice here, is that how do we choose to reverse time? Well, the first step is that we have to stop the trajectory that we're on at the moment, which is where we're thinking that it's like everything's backwards. So the current way we perceive cause and effect is that the cause is out in the material world, which is affecting our inner world. And that makes sense when we're moving forward, because that is separation. That is the path of separation. So now in terms of reversing that, we're starting to realize that no, it's the inner world that's the cause and the material world that's the effect, and that's the path back to source. That's our new future, if you would like. But in saying that, it's a future that already exists because we've already been through it. Maybe it doesn't look exactly the same, but it's the same energy, the same vibration on the path back to the future. So the first step in stopping the trajectory is really, how do we stop trying to push this arrow into the future, but how do we sit in this point of maximum stretch of the rubber band? And this is where things like present moment and mindfulness come in, because what we're doing there is we're stopping the trajectory of time. We're actually saying we're stopping time. It's like, no, we are here in this moment, instead of seeing the program that's running into the future going on and on and on. It's like the first step is getting that control of our mind so that we can actually choose. Then the second step is, well, once we stop the trajectory, we have to go back this way. And this is where I really like the concept of remembering the future, because we are remembering, we've been there before, we've been through this energy. So it's not the past though, but it is the future at the same time. So how do we then get our trajectory back, going back to source? Well, it becomes where we realize that our inner world is cause. So that means that everything that happens in the inside becomes real, and the stuff that's outside will follow. So what is real is our imagination, is our desire to create these things that already have existed. So I really like to call them rememberings rather than creations. This is where we get to turn everything upside down and invert it, in terms of the way that we see time progressing, in terms of cause and effect. And we realize that in choosing to focus on our inner world is how we imagine our future, which is actually remembering our past at the same time. And it just becomes about choosing that in every moment, choosing to be in our heart, choosing to be in our imagination, rather than being caught up in what's going on around us, which is collapsing as the rubber band has reached its maximum stretching point. So I'll just finish with an example of this, and I think a really relevant one is the concept of aging, because aging in itself is just a belief. So the forward trajectory of aging is that having the belief that humans age, and seeing yourself in the mirror and seeing your face changing and your body changing and saying, well, that's aging, and you're staying in that program, you're staying in that trajectory. But it's like, no, now I have to switch aging the other way. So, what's the opposite of aging? Youthing. So we start with saying no to those thoughts and beliefs and staying in the present moment. And I remember hearing something from Bashar, channeled by Daryl Ank, I think his name is, that basically said that the amount that we age is dependent on the amount of time that we experience. So if we're on this trajectory of where time is everything, we're experiencing every moment of time in this outside world, then we age a lot. When we stop the trajectory and we just stay in the present moment, that could be being in a flow state, then we actually slow down the amount of time that we perceive and we age less. So that's the first step. But then the third step, the second step, is reversing the trajectory of time, which is creating a new belief system about aging. Imagining our beautiful smooth skin, imagining having the abilities and characteristics that we had when we were younger. It's communicating that to our cells so that the cells respond and believe to this new belief system that is part of that new trajectory back to source, where we become more and more perfect, more and more healthy, more and more healed. So that's something I've been doing for quite a few years, is really trying to undo that belief of aging. And now I can see with this perspective of time exactly what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. It's because we're being called back to source perfection. So I hope that makes sense, and that's given you a new way to think about time. It certainly gave me a new way to think about time. I'll probably be back with some more videos really soon of some other information that's come in over the past few days. So I'll talk to you soon.